The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee will now begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Bender. I'm the chair of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee. I'm going to call to order our regular committee meeting for today, which is July 9th. I'd like to note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Reich.
Present.
Gordon. Councilmember Gordon. Fletcher. Cunningham.
Present.
Ellison.
Present.
Goodman.
Present.
Cano. Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Present.
Palmisano.
Present.
Jenkins. Councilmember Gordon. Cano. Jenkins. President Bender.
Here.
There are 9 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum for today's meeting. Council members, I know the clerk's office reached out with a heads up that this is a long agenda with many items, so thank you all for being here. At the beginning of our meeting, we do have 6 public hearings, all of which are tied to proposed land sales. The first land sale on the agenda is the proposed sale of city-owned property located at 3215 Gerard Avenue North, and we'll have Mr. Ramadan from CPED here to give us more information on this item. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Council President Bender and members of the committee. We do, as it was mentioned, have 6 land sales, 3215 Gerard Avenue North, for sale through the Minneapolis Homes policies for the program were established by the City Council on December 11, 2015 and February 10, 2017. Staff recommends the sale of 3215 Gerard Avenue North to Tyrone Robertson for its appraised value of $12,700, subject to conditions. 3215 Gerard was acquired on January 15, 2016 from the Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation. Staff marketed its property in an open house held in January 2020 with the notification sent to a listserv of now over 3,000 people. This is the only application received for this property. The lot size is 45 feet by 127, approximately 5,729 total square feet. The purchaser proposes to invest $650,000 to build a triplex with 1,175 finished square feet per unit. Each unit will have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and 1 stall in a detached 3-car garage. The purchaser intends to rent the units out without restrictions. CPED's construction management staff reviewed the scope of work and estimates submitted by the applicant and confirmed they are sufficient to meet the minimum program standards. Notification was provided to the Fowler Neighborhood Association on February 26, 2020. They did not make a recommendation. The purchaser was notified and is actually, I think, in the queue trying to be able to speak today at the public hearing if possible. Are there any questions for me?
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, I will note that we've been joined by Councilmember Gordon, and I will open the public hearing on this item. I believe we have one speaker, Terry Robertson, and you can speak by pushing *6 on your phone to unmute. Welcome. I'm not hearing anyone speak. I'll just check again, noting that you can push *6 if your phone is muted. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone chime in for the public hearing, so I will go ahead and close the public hearing. Of course, if we've missed you somehow, there are more items, and I think also relevant to that speaker who had wanted to speak on item 1. So with that, I close the public hearing. I will note that Council Members Cano and Council Vice President Jenkins are here as well, and I will see if there's a motion on this proposed land sale.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Ellison,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano, Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender,
Aye.
Palmisano. There are 11
Aye.
ayes. There are 12 ayes.
Thank you. That item carries and will be referred to the full city council meeting. The next land sale on the agenda is a proposed sale of city-owned property located at 2714 Bryant Avenue North. And Mr. Ramadan will give that staff report. In case I've missed everyone, I'll just note that all 12 members of the city council are present on this meeting.
Councilmember Bender, as noted by our Councilmember Cunningham through an email that he sent to me, you'll note that these designs are very, very similar. This is a group of 3 developers who are each individually owning properties, Tyrone Robertson being 3, Kurt Brecky with 2, and Keith Dawson with 1, as well as another one that was provided last week. Mr. Robertson did let me know that this was just a preliminary design, that we will not have 8 identical houses, but they just want to get a design, a concept to the city council in order to start the land sale process. So I make it brief because they all are pretty much along the same lines. I'll just read the first part of it, which is the sale through the Minneapolis homes. And that staff recommends the sale of 2714 Bryant Avenue North to Tyrone Robertson for its appraised value of $5,000, subject to conditions. And Mr. Robertson is here, and I will stop at this time for the sake of brevity.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing and see if anyone would like to speak on this item. Would anyone like to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and see if there is a motion on this proposed land sale.
So moved.
I'm happy. Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the item? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Ellison,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item will be forwarded to the city council. The next land sale is at 2619 Oliver Avenue North, and I'll turn it over to staff again. Thank you.
Council President Bender, the staff recommends the sale of 2619 Oliver Avenue North, again to Tyrone Robertson for its appraised value of $5,000, subject to conditions, and I will stop there.
Are there any questions on this item? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing and see if anyone would like to speak on this item. Would anyone like to speak? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and ask if there's a motion on this item.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Ellison,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item will be forwarded to council. Next, we have the proposed sale of city-owned property located at 2704 Bryant Avenue North. Mr. Ramadan.
Council President Bender, members of the committee, the staff recommends the sale of 2704 Bryant Avenue North to Kurt Brecky for its appraised value of $5,000 subject to conditions. Again, this is part of the same development team. And I will stop there.
Thank you, sir. And just a note, each of these designs are all for triplexes. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That was in response to the city's desire to see increased housing density on lots that had previously been zoned as single family in order to, and in the case of the other applicant to be an owner occupant as well.
Do you have any more information? So the intention is for there to be an owner occupant who then rents the other units?
Mr. Brecky and Mr. Robertson do not intend to be owner occupants. Mr. Dawson, the last one on this list, is already scheduled to be an owner occupant in one of the units.
Great, thank you for that information. I think it'll be interesting to track how this works and see, as we continue to adjust this program. So I appreciate staff continuing to make tweaks and to really use this program to meet all of our policy goals. I think with significant input from the council members who represent wards 4 and 5, where a lot of these land sales take place. So thank you for all of that. Is there any other questions from council members for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this item? You can push *6 to unmute your phone. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and see if there's a motion on this item.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Ellison,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and the item will be forwarded to council. Next, we have the proposed sale of city-owned property located at 2317 3rd Avenue North. Mr. Ramadan.
Council President Bender, members of the committee, staff recommends the sale of 2317 3rd Street North to Kurt Brecky for its appraised value of $5,200 subject to conditions. Again, this is the second purchase for Mr. Brecky. I will stop there.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff on this item? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this item? You can push *6 to unmute your phone. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Ellison,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item will be forwarded to council. The final proposed land sale we have today is for city-owned property at 2519 3rd Avenue North. Mr. Ramadan.
Thanks again, Council President Bender and members of the committee. The staff recommends the sale of 2320 4th Street North to Mr. Keith Dawson for its appraised value of $5,200. As I mentioned previously, Mr. Dawson is the one who plans to be an owner occupant. Are there any other questions for me?
Any questions for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Would anyone like to speak? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I will just quickly comment again. I know I said a little bit earlier, but I just want to thank staff for all the hard work that goes into each of these land sales. It's really, I think, very time intensive, but one of the many ways that we're working to create housing for folks and create housing and homeownership opportunity for people, as well as create a lot of housing options during a time where our housing system is under great stress, and we know many in our community are facing housing instability. So just thank you. I know that it may not feel like a lot to have 15 new units of housing, but all of it matters, and I think that care and intention that's gone into continuing to refine this program is really meaningful. So thank you to staff and to the policymakers again who've helped guide this work. Anything else on this item? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Connell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano. Jenkins.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries with enthusiastic support from Ward 9. Thank you, team. And that will be forwarded to City Council for final approval. Thank you, Mr. Ramadan, again. We have 37 items on our consent agenda today, which are items 7 through 44 on our printed agenda. Of course, as always, please let me know if you'd like to pull any items for questions or comments. So I will read these items, beginning with item 7, which is approving the payment of cost judgments in the lawsuit of John Hayden et al. Versus the City of Minneapolis by payment of $767.63 to the plaintiffs, and authorizing the City Attorney's Office to execute any documents necessary to satisfy this judgment. This is related to the Parks lawsuit. Items 8 through 11 are approving the settlement of worker compensation claims and dismissing the appeals of Public Employee Retirement Association duty disability continuing health care, the details of which are listed on the agenda. Item 12 is setting a public hearing for July 23rd, 2020 to consider the reappointment by the Executive Committee of John Friedel to the appointed position of Fire Chief for a 2-year term beginning January 2nd, 2020. Item 13 is setting a public hearing for July 23rd, 2020 for the Freelance Worker Protections Ordinance. Item 14 is referring to staff and ordinance amending, altering, and adding provisions related to the police department and its duty structure and oversight. Item 15 is an ordinance relating to the proposed Community Safety and Violence Prevention Charter Amendment. This item is currently before the Charter Commission, so this item is a placeholder on our agenda so that we can receive the body's report when it is available. So I will move to continue this item to our next regular meeting, which is scheduled for July 23rd. Items 16 and 17 are resolutions adopting the title and ballot language to be submitted to qualified voters of the City of Minneapolis at the general election on November 3rd, 2020, related to special municipal elections and redistricting of wards and park districts. Item 18 is a resolution approving the appointment of election judges for the August 11th, 2020 state primary and authorizing the Director of Elections to appoint additional election judges as needed. Item 19 is an ordinance amending the Summit House Housing Improvement Area Ordinance, extending the effective date to July 25th, 2020. Item 20 is approval of an extension of the executive development rights for development of 628 Franklin Avenue East to Divine Institute or an affiliate. Item 21 is passage of a resolution requesting the transfer of $4 million from the Minneapolis cost of issuance account held by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Housing Finance Board to the city. Item 22 approves master contracts for eligible providers of workforce development services for 2021 through 2025. Item 23 is the acceptance of a COVID-19 Community Development Bank Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG-CV, from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for a supplemental funding grant award of $6.6 million and COVID-19 Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG-CV, supplemental funding award of $3.3 million. Item 24 is a contract amendment that authorizes an increase to the contract with Deloitte Consulting, LLP, and the amount of $180,000 for a total amount not to exceed $952,000, $200,000 for benefits, consulting, and actuarial services. Item 25 is a contract amendment that authorizes an increase to a contract with Ebert Inc. for Fire Station 4 renovations project in the amount of $41,721.97. Item 26 accepts a proposal of LS Black Constructors in the amount of $8.4 million to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals for construction services for the Minneapolis Impound Facility Improvements Project. Item 27 is receiving and filing the 2019 City of Minneapolis Enterprise Energy Usage and Carbon Emissions Report. Item 28 authorizes issuance of a request for proposals for community solar garden subscriptions totaling up to 10 million kilowatt hours annually. Item 29 is the authorization of a contract with Innovo Benefits Administration and Marketing and an amount not to exceed $226,000 for retiree benefit program administration services for a term of 5 years and with the option to extend the contract at the sole option of the city up to 5 additional years. Item 30 authorizes a partnership agreement with the Loring Greenway Associates to perform installation and maintenance of landscape and hardscape amenities, provide for tree care, and sponsor events within the Loring Greenway. Item 31 is authorizing an agreement with the Metropolitan Council whereby the city will receive an amount not to exceed $2.28 million for work completed as part of the Hennepin Avenue reconstruction project from Washington Avenue to 12th Street. Item 32 authorizes a cooperative funding agreement with Hennepin County for Americans with Disabilities Act related improvements project on 46th Street South. Item 33 is an agreement with the Minneapolis Grain Exchange for steam service heat of the Jerry Hoff parking ramp in the amount of $265,621. Item 34 is authorizing an agreement with West Yost Associates in the amount of $298,901 to provide professional services for secure integration and communications, alarming for water treatment and distribution services. Item 35 amends a contract with Thomas & Sons Construction in the amount of $133,213 for a total amount not to exceed $10.6 million. Item 36 amends a contract with the Suburban Elevator of Minnesota in the amount of $260,000 for a total amount not to exceed $1.86 million. Item 37 is a contract amendment with Global Specialty Contractors, Inc. in the amount of $40,915.13 for a total amount not to exceed $8 million. Item 38 accepts a gift from the Green Minneapolis for revitalization of PV Plaza, as well as an increase to the appropriation for the Public Works Department by $64,000. Item 39 is several appointments to several different special service district appointments, which are listed in detail in the agenda. Item 40 and 41 authorizes submittal of grant applications to the National Association of Transportation Officials, or NACTO, in the amounts of $15,000 and $25,000. Our Public Works Director currently serves as the chair of that organization. Item 42 accepts the low bid of Michaels Corporation in the amount of $1.99 million to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals necessary for the pump station number 5 North Flood Wall Rehabilitation Project. Item 43 accepts the lowest bid of Corval Constructions Inc. Constructors Incorporated in the amount of $292,369 to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals necessary for the pumping station number 7 boiler replacement project. Item 44 is acceptance of a low bid of Vortec Hydrovac and Televising to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals necessary for closed circuit televised inspection of the city's stormwater sewer system. So those are the consent items. Do any of my colleagues wish to pull any of the items off for further discussion? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to pull up for discussion. I just want to make sure that I highlight it. We probably would have gotten a presentation on it for item number 27 regarding the city's efforts to transition into fully renewable energy or electricity for municipal uses. So we probably would have gotten a presentation about it at the Peace Committee, so I wanted to make sure to highlight it because this is really great work. So last year in 2019, the city eliminated 24,000 metric tons in carbon emissions. Since 2008, the city's electricity consumption has gone down 21%, and 88% of electricity used by the city comes now from renewable resources. We are on track to reach 100% renewable electricity by the end of 2021, which is an entirely full year before the 2023 goal. And I just want to make sure that I say thank you in particular to Brian Milberg as well as Councilmember Gordon for their leadership. This work started rolling in 2017, so thank you both for all of your hard work.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham, and thank you for highlighting that work. And we can see it up on the screen, all of the really amazing progress that has been made. We also asked staff to email this presentation around so council members had a chance to see it and be able to share it as well. And certainly if there's any questions or further comments on this or any of the other items, please chime in. And for sake of discussion, I will move the consent agenda and see if there's any further discussion or any items for which council members would like more information. I don't see any further discussion. I did want to note for item 20, this is a property that the city owns and has worked for many years, I think, to get in use for housing, and we happen to have had this on the agenda prior to getting questions about it, but this partner that's working to provide housing for young people who have been in the foster care system just needs some more time to work out their financing, and so this item number 20 is related to an extension to allow them the time that they need to finalize this really great project, and the details I think are available in the agenda, or of course you can always reach out to housing staff for more information on that great project as well. Anything further on the consent agenda? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Cano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and those items will be forwarded to the council meeting. This brings us to our discussion items. We'll begin with item number 45, which is to revise the Minneapolis Homes homeownership products to align with the Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan. We have Roxanne Kimball from the Community Planning and Economic Development Department to give that presentation.
Good afternoon, council members. This presentation is a continuation of the February council study session about Minneapolis Homes homebuyer programs. Our recommendations today incorporate additional community and council feedback from February through May. Today we're bringing two council actions. The first focused on aligning our Minneapolis Homes homebuyer programs and policies to align with the Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan. The second is a presentation by Grounded Solutions Network of their recommendations for how the city can improve its creation of perpetually affordable housing. Next slide. There's a lot of policy change here, 6 different program guideline and policy changes to be exact, and some very significant shifts in how we do business. I'm going to frame the discussion in terms of high-level program and policy recommendations. There's a lot of additional detail about the specific changes in the request for council action. There are also options that council can elect. We'll do our best to highlight those in the conversation. Next slide. Minneapolis Homes is an umbrella name for a variety of housing products. We provide homebuyer support focused on improving access to homeownership through education and down payment assistance. Property, we manage city-owned land and offer it for sale to achieve city goals and reinvigorate vacant spaces. And financing, we create new units of housing for homebuyers to purchase, and we help homeowners sustain their homes with home improvement loans. Today, we're focusing on our homebuyer-focused financing products and city-owned property. The existing names of the programs are listed on this slide. Next slide. Since Minneapolis Homes was launched in 2017, conversations in Minneapolis about housing policy have evolved. Common themes from policies passed by this council include that unjust policies led to the disparities of today that are most pronounced for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrant communities. We must disrupt displacement trends and stabilize households in their homes, serve households with the highest disparities by providing deeper investments, and eliminate barriers that prevent access to wealth building opportunities by low wealth households and BIPOC-owned businesses. These conversations led the city to commission a study in 2019 to look specifically at market trends impacting the homebuyer market in Minneapolis and best practices for increasing the rate of longer-term affordable housing through Minneapolis programs. Grounded Solutions Network was selected for the study and will be presenting their report in a moment. As a complement to that market study, city staff piloted several programs over the course of the last several years to look at different ways of doing development. We have continuously engaged community members in a conversation to better understand how we might adjust our programs. During the past year, we've reflected on the learnings from Grounded Solutions Network, the community engagement themes we've heard, and the city policy discussions, and looked critically at our homebuyer programs. Our intention today is to better align our programs with the feedback we've received. Next slide. First, there are several city policies that call for ending racial disparities in homeownership. Minneapolis disparities are among the worst in the nation. We wanted to conscientiously look at what it would take to end racial disparities in homeownership as a component of this work. Based on the best data we have today, we would need to support nearly 13,000 BIPOC renter households in their path to homeownership. Grounded Solutions Network did additional analysis to look more specifically at the incomes of BIPOC renters in the city of Minneapolis. 85% of BIPOC renters have household incomes below 80% of area median income, and over half are below 30% of area median income. This context of who we're trying to serve, combined with the community voices and research about national best practices, helped to shape our recommendations. Next slide. In this past year, our Minneapolis Homes team has coordinated 24 different community engagement sessions that engaged over 1,000 voices in collaborative discussion about homebuyer programs within the context of the Grounded Solutions Network study, including neighborhood organizations, residents, developers, advocacy organizations, other city departments, as well as feedback from council. The recommendations I'll walk through were shaped in direct response to the themes we heard from community members. I want to specifically thank Erica Coleman, who did the heavy lifting of coordinating and summarizing all of the feedback from community members, which is attached in the Grounded Solutions Network report, as well as our full Minneapolis Homes team and Grounded Solutions Network, who facilitated discussion, listened to community, and discussed what we heard, and the over 1,000 community members who collaborated with us to develop these recommendations today. Next slide. There's a great deal of detail in the request for council action about the specific changes to different programs. At a high level, we're making the following recommendations and applying them across our homebuyer products. For homebuyer support activities, the city funds homeownership counseling and homeownership capacity building that serves 1,800 households annually. Continuing this work is critical. In the upcoming RFP for this work, we propose focusing on culturally specific outreach and improving options for homebuyer education for 2 to 4 unit properties. We additionally recommend continuing the Homeownership Opportunity Minneapolis Down Payment Assistance Program, which provides up to $10,000 down payment assistance for households below 80% of area median income that complete financial wellness counseling and purchase in the city of Minneapolis. Next slide. A key message we heard from community members was slow down property sales to leverage city land for broader goals, including affordable housing, sustainable and community-led development, and wealth creation in low-wealth communities. Staff are recommending changing the unified housing policy to require that all city-owned residential property, regardless of unit size, has affordability requirements. Staff additionally recommend that the scarce city land in Northeast and South Minneapolis is reserved for perpetually affordable housing. The city will stop accepting offers for vacant land without affordability requirements effective August 31st, 2020, to afford applicants that have been working on applications through our current program with an opportunity to complete their offers. Moving forward, vacant land would be marketed through an annual property and financing application process, which I'll describe next. Staff are recommending that sale of vacant buildings without subsidy continue through a revised Minneapolis Homes Vacant Housing Rehab Program. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that 85% of BIPOC renters have household incomes below 80% of area median income, and over half are below 30% of area median income. To better focus our limited resources, we recommend focusing on 80% of area median income and below across all of our homebuyer financing programs. We recommend providing sufficient subsidy to serve 3 different income tiers to provide a diversity of affordable housing units. Later, Naaman Freeman from Grounded Solutions Network will share the subsidy that's needed to achieve this. There is an option to consider eliminating 1 or more income tiers. We also heard from community a desire for a citywide strategy that creates a diversity of affordable housing types. Historically, most of our finance units have been new construction 1 to 2 unit developments tied to city land, which is disproportionately available in North Minneapolis. We want to build on the success we've seen through the Missing Middle Housing pilot last year and the Homeownership Works program by diversifying the projects we'll fund. In response, our team recommends providing financing of both city-owned and privately owned property, allowing for acquisition and/or rehabilitation of existing units as both a stabilization strategy and a strategy for perpetually affordable housing, and encouraging missing middle development of 2 to 20 unit buildings. A couple key examples of the types of projects that could be possible with these changes to our programs include cluster developments, cooperative housing, stabilizing homes in foreclosure, and tenant opportunity to purchase. Next slide. We have 4 different programs that are doing similar things. We recommend consolidating into a single program and process. We found significant success through programs that broadly advertise. Last year, over 100 people came to our broadly advertised information session, and half of the developers approved for funding were BIPOC-led. We want to build on that success by wrapping the Homeownership Works, Homeownership, Missing Middle, and Minneapolis Homes Development Assistance programs under a new consolidated program, Minneapolis Homes Financing. Because layering multiple sources of financing is a significant barrier for new community-led and some BIPOC developers, we recommend providing an option for the full subsidy need through our program. The city directly leverages funding from Minnesota Housing that helps to make this feasible. Finally, we heard from community members that we need more options for perpetually affordable housing. Currently, the city definition is long-term affordable, which is a 30-year period that ends. Habitat for Humanity is an example of a long-term affordable housing provider. Community engagement clarified that perpetually affordable housing, with a term that renews every 30 years, is preferable. Habitat will have the same options to partner with perpetually affordable housing models or create their own perpetually affordable housing model that other developers have, which I'll be describing on the next slide. Habitat was a very engaged partner in the development of these recommendations and is supportive of a focus on perpetually affordable housing. We additionally heard strong support for City of Lakes Community Land Trust, which is the only perpetually affordable housing model currently. However, some community members framed that CLCLT's model won't work for them. For those community members, the concept of a ground lease was uncomfortable. There's a strong value for the ownership of both the land and the building. Similarly, there was a desire for a more transparent resale formula. We did 2 different community workshops, and the community workshops that came, the conclusion that came from those community workshops was a preference for a 2% fixed rate formula. Our response is a recommendation to create a city-sponsored perpetually affordable housing model utilizing a 2% fixed rate resale formula. The recommendation is to continue to be open to new models or formulas that come from community. Naaman will be speaking to additional detail about the city-sponsored perpetually affordable housing model in the next presentation. Next slide. A goal through Minneapolis Homes Financing is to provide more options to access perpetually affordable housing and city financing opportunities while preserving access to higher wealth building opportunities in North Minneapolis. In North Minneapolis, we are holding open the option for recapture or affordability restrictions that apply just to the first purchaser of a property due to the naturally affordable market conditions in North, coupled with the high proportion of city-owned land in North. Both effects of the dual crises of the Minneapolis tornado and foreclosure crisis that disproportionately affected residents in the North community. Throughout the city, there is a perpetually affordable housing option that requires a minimum 20% discount on the market value of a property to provide access for a home buyer. Minneapolis Homes financing projects that are 1 to 20 units have 3 pathways: partnering with City of Lakes Community Land Trust model, proposing a new model that demonstrates perpetual affordability, or utilizing the city's new 2% model. Inclusionary zoning units of 20 units or more would all be enrolled in the city's new 2% fixed rate model, which Grounded Solutions will speak to in the next RCA presentation. Next slide. I started off with the number of households, almost 13,000 we need to serve today in order to eliminate racial disparities. I'm not going to sugarcoat our expected outcomes and say these program changes will eliminate disparities. Our best projection is that we may reduce disparities of today by half by the year 2040 if market conditions and funding amounts remain constant. What I can commit is that these program changes establish a racially equitable framework that was collaboratively developed with impacted communities for funding homeownership projects, and that will evaluate against the outcomes framed on this slide in 2024. Next slide. And with that, I'll take any questions and feedback from council.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kimball. Are there any questions from council members for staff? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Roxanne, for this presentation. I'm very excited about the work. I will say I wish that I could have been a little bit more involved as someone whose ward is so impacted by it, as well as someone who's been quite frequently in conversation with you all about it. So I'm planning on taking some time. I unfortunately just got the packet for today's meeting yesterday, so I've only been able to briefly go through the report, but plan to do so more. In the meantime, I wanted to ask a question around, and maybe this will be discussed by Grounded Solutions, but this Minneapolis Homes, or the infill program, was something that was a part of the 2017 election. Like, this has been something that folks in North Minneapolis have been talking about very much so. So I'm curious, I too have heard frequently slow down the land sales. It's something that I've talked about with you all. Can you explain to me, so I heard you acknowledge that, but I didn't really hear specifically like what action is being taken in order to slow that down. So I'll pause there and I'll wait to hear. Yeah, thanks.
So the action that's being taken, currently we have a program called Minneapolis Homes Build, and that advertises all of our vacant land in North Minneapolis through a rolling application process. So all of our lots are posted online, and someone can submit an offer at any time and purchase land for its appraised value with very few requirements and restrictions. The change that's happening is we're saying we're going to end accepting offers through that program by August 31st of 2020. And moving forward, we're going to reserve all of our vacant land and market it through our Minneapolis Homes financing program. That program has affordability requirements, sustainability requirements for the development. We look at who is doing the development and look for community representation amongst the developers or cooperatively developed plans. And so effectively we're applying all of the additional requirements that go along with our funding to all of our city-owned land moving forward.
And so you all expect then, by having those additional restrictions and guidelines for buyers to follow, that will inherently slow down the process? I guess kind of a part of the intention of requesting slowing down the sale of land is from my experience of the conversations I've had with my constituents, is around the community wanting to be able to have more agency and ownership over the land itself. As one of my constituents said, like, if we have a vacant lot on our block, then like if we as neighbors decide that we want to put an alien landing pad on that vacant lot, we should be able to have some say in what happens with that land. I mean, it's obviously kind of like a humorous extreme example, but you know, like the point being that folks want to be able to have more agency over the land, because while it's city owned, it's like it is therefore publicly owned, you know, like, you know, how kind of like that in between space. And so so I think that's kind of a little bit more of what I'm asking is, like, you know, so is it that the expectation through these new restrictions that it will slow down, and also how does that actually increase the agency of community and what happens to the land that is on our blocks and in our neighborhoods?
Mm-hmm. So I can say regarding increasing agency, through the development of these changes, we were deliberate in trying to engage community members, and specifically engage community members in Ward 4 and Ward 5 in particular, where we own the majority of our land. All of the proposals that we receive, we submit for public comment. And so we include neighborhood comments that we receive in our RFP process. I do think that applying additional requirements and restrictions on our city-owned land is inherently going to slow down the process of selling our land. And I would also say, I'm committed to continuing the conversation. If there are additional ideas about how we can provide additional agency, then I'm certainly committed to having that conversation.
Yes, Madam President, if I may.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. So thank you for that additional information. That's a part of my desire for wishing that I have been able to be more involved is being able to like also expand the pool of folks who are involved. I did read through the community engagement component and felt as though I could have possibly helped to scale that up and raise greater awareness around it. I think that you all did phenomenal, like the kind of work that was done. I just wish that I could have been able to help scale it up to be able to have a larger sample size. I would like for us to be able to continue this conversation because, you know, in the Way Home document, you know, we have strategies, but they're, you know, and you know this, like I've asked several times around, like, is it possible for us to have a clear strategic plan about what are we using the land for, and like how are we specifically leveraging the land? I think that we're kind of starting to get there, but I think that it's just hard for my constituents to make the connection between like the land that's being sold from their perspective and in mine. Granted, we're changing it very rapidly. It's like what's the greater outcome? So I'm starting to see that here a little bit more. But I would like to be able to stay in conversation around what does agency look like, you know, outside of like submitting it for public comment or neighborhood associations. So just wanted to share that. So I look forward to continuing conversations. And I see Andrea wants to possibly jump in if that's okay, Madam President.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. And I did, before Ms. Brennan speaks, I did add to the chat the recommended actions that staff have asked us to take, but I'm happy to also just read them for the record for the public. So that would be to amend, so item 1 would be amending the guidelines for Minneapolis Homes, Home Ownership Opportunity Minneapolis to clarify financial wellness counseling requirements and modify the income requirements. Item 2, amending guidelines for Minneapolis Homes Build Rehab to acquire and sell vacant buildings without city financing to eliminate blight, discontinue build homebuyer incentive and rehab down payment assistance. Item 3, adopting guidelines for Minneapolis Homes financing to produce and sustain affordable homeownership units throughout the city of Minneapolis and expand options to create perpetually affordable housing. Item 4, modify guidelines to missing middle rental pilot to focus on 2 to 20 unit affordable rental projects subject to budget authority. So those are the recommended items that staff has provided to us, and those are on the printed agenda from the, which is available on LIMS. Ms. Brennan.
Thank you, Madam President and Councilmember Cunningham. I just wanted to jump in and reassure the council that we absolutely have heard the request and the interest in looking more comprehensively at a broad strategy around overall community ownership options and more community agency as it relates to all of our programs, and certainly as it relates to the disposition of any city-owned or controlled property. We see this as the critical first step in number 1, stopping the sale of properties that are not totally consistent with our new policy guidance that has evolved over the last couple of years. But we absolutely intend to continue to have those conversations about other ways that we can leverage city assets, including city land, to better meet all of the city's objectives and goals under our comprehensive plan and our strategic racial equity action plan and other key city policy and guidance.
Thank you. And could one of you speak again to the policy question you had highlighted and asked, which is the decision around what level of affordability in relationship to the level of subsidy required?
Yes. So I framed that there are 3 different income tiers that we're recommending we create through our Minneapolis Homes Financing Program. Naaman Freeman from Grounded Solutions Network will speak to how we're calculating subsidy need to serve each of those different income tiers. The option that I framed to council is that we could make a decision to eliminate one or more of the income tiers. But I'd suggest that we allow Naaman to sort of speak to the subsidy need, but just sort of keep that in your minds as we move forward.
So would that action come as part of the next item, or are you suggesting we may amend this item prior to the council meeting?
You could amend this item prior to the council meeting.
Alternatively, colleagues, we could also move on to the next presentation and then take up action on both of the items at the end of that presentation. You know, okay, great. I'll see if there are any other questions from council members. Certainly happy to entertain a motion on this item now, or otherwise can suggest that we move on with the next presentation and then take up the actions together at the end. Councilmember Gordon.
I think that sounds good. We've been during this presentation, we heard reference to what we're going to find out during the next item. So why don't we get all that information and then move them both forward at the same time.
Great, thanks. Any questions or comments before we move on? I do want to thank staff very much for this and just acknowledge that, you know, at the beginning of this term, just a couple of years ago, we had a pretty detailed and deep conversation among the body of the city council about our affordable housing goals. And there was some discussion about sort of the relative approaches of working to avoid what some people call a concentration of poverty versus the ultimate position that this council took, which is really working to make sure that there are affordable options available in our communities across the city, including our lower income communities, and that especially in the housing market that we have been seeing with costs rising so rapidly, that having those affordable housing options created and preserved in our neighborhoods is such an important priority. And so I just want to highlight and acknowledge that at the foundation of this work, of this presentation and the next one, is the position that this council took to really prioritize affordable housing options in every neighborhood, including those that currently have lower housing costs and prices, and to really prioritize a number of goals related to race equity in housing. So it really matters, I think, to have, you know, all of your voices as part of this discussion and to have some of those higher level goals set by this council. And so with that, I will then move us on to the presentation for the next item. And again, thank you to the CPED staff. And Ms. Kimball, you were probably planning to lead off on this presentation as well, so I'll turn it back over to you. Oh, and I do see a comment from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that has gone into this, and this is a really important tool to help us address the gaps in our city related to home ownership, between Blacks and the broader community. And really wanted to highlight Ms. Erica Coleman's contributions to this work as well, and just thank the whole entire CPED staff, particularly the Housing Division, for bringing this work forward. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ms. Kimball to move on with the next presentation.
Great. So our next presentation, Naaman Freeman from Grounded Solutions Network will be walking us through Grounded Solutions Network's recommendations. They also have provided a report that's a culmination of a year-long engagement process. So with that, Naaman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Roxanne. Good afternoon, council members. Again, I'm Naaman Freeman, Senior State and Local Policy Specialist at Grounded Solutions Network. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you all through the Permanently Affordable Homeownership Program recommendation. Next slide. We'll start with reviewing a summary of the market and affordability analysis. And finally, we'll cover our recommendation for creating perpetually affordable homeownership opportunities. So next slide. Let's dive into the analysis. Next slide. Since 1999, incomes in Minneapolis have increased somewhat steadily. As of 2019, the area median income, or AMI, for the Minneapolis metro area was $100,000. Although the median income may have seen spikes and downturns in the short term, over time, the compound annual growth rate for this period was around 2%. This pattern is consistent nationally and is important to note, as I'll come back to it as we discuss how the resale formula preserves affordability. The increase in median income is reflective of both the increasing incomes of existing residents and migration of higher income households into the city. Next slide. So as incomes have risen, has Minneapolis become more affordable? Well, home prices have appreciated over the past 2 decades. From 2003 to 2018, the compound annual growth rate of home prices was 3%, despite the downturn of the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008. Generally, prices across the city have recovered since the Great Recession. However, increases in prices have not been even across all 11 Minneapolis communities. In communities where home prices have historically been more affordable, they've seen an increase in home prices that's been much faster than more affluent neighborhoods. Particularly in the communities near North, Camden, and Powderhorn, where the effects of the foreclosure crisis were more profound, home prices have doubled or tripled since the recession. As part of our market analysis, we looked deeper at home sales during the year of 2018. There weren't many neighborhoods where homes were sold at a price affordable to households below 50% of AMI. If you all can look at the chart on the right, the bar graph, you'll see that the 2 darkest shades of blue on that bar graph represent the percentage of homes sold at prices affordable to households below 50% of AMI. Even for the few homes that were sold at affordable prices, it isn't guaranteed that they were sold to low-income households. Households earning more than 50% of AMI, as well as investors or flippers, are competing for these low-cost homes in a growing market like Minneapolis. It is also possible that some of the homes that are available at prices affordable to low-income households may not be habitable or could require substantial renovation. It should also be noted that there is a lot of uncertainty about how the for-sale market will react to COVID-19. Next slide. An affordable homeownership program would target households that are currently renters. Black, Indigenous, and other POC households are more likely to rent their home than white households. Here you can see BIPOC renters in particular. This includes Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native, Indigenous, and households of other ethnicities. A whopping 85% of BIPOC households are below 80% of AMI. Almost 3/4 are below 50% of AMI. Next slide. Looking more closely, the number of households in each income tier varies widely between race or ethnicity. There aren't even 3,000 total Black renters between 51% of AMI and 100% of AMI. Referencing Roxanne's earlier slide, the city would have to convert 13,000 BIPOC renters, that includes 8,000 Black renters, to home ownership to close the disparities between white households. Looking at this data, it is clear that the program will need to create opportunities for households below 50% of AMI to begin to overcome those disparities. Adding complexity to the situation, BIPOC households often face barriers in addition to income like low or no credit and bias from lenders or financial institutions. Hopefully, if the city approves a program that provides more affordable home ownership opportunities for low-wealth households, financial institutions will be more inclined to provide products that cater to those with additional barriers. Next slide. So hypothetically, how much subsidy is needed to serve low-income households? The total subsidy need is the sum of the affordability gap, highlighted in dark orange, and the project gap, highlighted in light orange. Affordability gap is the difference between the price a household can afford and the market value of a home. Project gap is the difference between the market value and the total development cost of the home in the case that it costs more to build the home than what a developer could sell it for on the open market. The total subsidy need to develop an affordable home to a household earning exactly 60% of the AMI can be $160,000 or more. For households earning less than 60% of AMI, the total subsidy can reach upwards of $250,000. I should point out here, one reason the city is recommending keeping its current Minneapolis Homes Recapture program is because the affordability gap for households at 80% of AMI is so small, it may not warrant putting perpetually affordable restrictions on a home. Perhaps an investment of $30,000 in a household should be treated differently than an investment of $160,000. I'm going to pause here to make sure there's no clarifying questions or comments before I move on.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from council members so far? I don't hear any, so I'm sure there will be. Oh, Council Vice President. Sorry, Council Vice President has a question.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to just get clarity. Thank you, Madam President, on the various gaps again. Can you just go over this slide one more time?
Yeah. So the affordability gap, which is highlighted in dark orange, is the difference between what a household can afford or what is determined to be the affordable price for a household and the market price or appraised value of the home. The project gap is the difference between that appraised value and the total development cost or the amount it costs to build or develop that home. In many cases, as Roxanne spoke to earlier, it costs more to build the home than what that home is actually appraised for.
That is very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for this presentation thus far. I'm hoping that you would actually explain the logic again for the recapture versus the perpetually affordable housing. Could you say that again, please?
Yes, I'm going to speak to it a little bit later as well, but I'll kind of try and re-explain the extent of which I've talked about it already. But the reason why the city is wants to recommend keeping its current Minneapolis Homes Recapture program is because the affordability gap, as you see on the far left-hand bar for 80% of AMI, is maybe so small it may not warrant putting perpetual affordable restrictions on a home. All right, and so if you see that affordability gap is $30,000 for the 80% of AMI household, whereas it's $180,000 for the 40% AMI household.
Thank you.
I see Councilmember Gordon has a question, but I have a quick follow-up, which is, I mean, is another way to say this that if the city chooses to continue to pursue that 80% AMI level, that's it's just a different approach than really targeting more city dollars to the deeper levels of affordability, at which point we would likely want to maintain a requirement of affordability. So they're almost two different strategies. The 80% AMA strategy isn't so much about maintaining those deeper level of affordability, but the flip side is that it doesn't cost as much money for the city. Is that another way to say that? Or if it's not, then please feel free to.
I think that's exactly right.
Clarify.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay. But you are also saying that we're not really seeing a huge increase in the sale price at that 80% AMI level. Or is that not true?
I'm not quite sure which I don't think that may be true.
Okay.
An increase in the sale price at the 80% of AMI level, or an increase in the sale price within certain areas of the city?
The resale price of a home that we've sold at that 80% AMI level. I guess I'll ask it another way. Do you or CPED staff have a projection of how much the affordability level would change if there are not affordability requirements for the 80% sale value?
I may defer to CPED staff on that one, if I may.
Yes, hi. This is Roxanne Young-Kimball. So what this slide is trying to get at is that we're trying to achieve having a citywide strategy. In some locations in the city, home values are naturally affordable currently to households that are at or below 80% of area median income. In those locations, we're recommending that we continue a recapture program that only has affordability requirements for the first purchaser. And specifically, that's a requirement in North. It's only on city-owned land in North, because we're trying to be responsive to the feedback that we heard from North residents about ensuring that there's wealth building opportunity in that community. Throughout the rest of the city, we're recommending perpetually affordable housing. And there's a requirement with our perpetually affordable housing that there's a minimum of a 20% discount, or in other words, that a minimum of 20% of the appraised value of a home is provided as a subsidy to a home buyer in exchange for the perpetual affordable housing requirements. One of the things that we're trying to achieve is making sure that if we're putting on an equity sharing formula, that the amount of subsidy that we're providing is really a but-for test. But for enrolling in this perpetually affordable housing program, homeownership would not have otherwise been possible. Council does have an option to say we want everything to be perpetually affordable, and that's a conversation that we could continue to have.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Sorry here, I'm getting up to speed. So it's curious about the long-term costs of keeping it perpetually affordable and what those might be to me. But I also, when I was looking at this slide, was struck by how out of proportion appraised value seems to be with what people are making, and it just struck me that what we really need to focus on is how could we actually lower the cost of building some housing. And I understand this is the 280,000 appraised value is must have 3 bedrooms. It looks like it's for a family of 4, and I'm not sure how many bathrooms or any of those kinds of things. But one other way to get to meet these needs would actually be to figure out ways to manufacture or build these homes that weren't so expensive, so that they could actually be closer to what people could afford, or also, of course, raising the wages. And nobody really needs to respond to that, but it just struck me of why don't we have a house that's you can build for 190,000 or even for 100,000, and what would that look like?
Okay, thank
I
you,
think that's a very
Council.
good.
Was there anything that staff wanted to add or related to Councilmember Gordon's comments?
This is Roxanne Young-Kimball again. I would just say completely agreed, Councilmember Gordon, and that is part of why we're making the recommendation to diversify the types of housing units that we're trying to encourage through this program, which I spoke to earlier.
I have one more detailed question that actually represented from the Land Trust sent to council members, which is specific to the mechanism for the 2% fixed rate model, if it's a deed restriction or a ground lease or a mortgage, or can you speak more to the financing details of that tool from the city?
This is Roxanne Young-Kimball again. We are using a declaration of restrictive covenants for the city 2% fixed rate model that would be renewed upon each property sale. And Naaman will be speaking to that further in his presentation.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we've asked and talked about this a lot. I do just want to highlight the policy question before us is about whether or not we treat North Minneapolis differently in terms of the affordability requirements, and kind of following different paths, one about wealth creation and one about housing affordability. And I think, of course, the council members who represent those wards will, I'm sure, weigh in and help guide that decision. And I know it's been one, again, of kind of a longstanding question, because both of those goals are goals of the city and goals that the city council has voiced support for. So just weighing the kind of pros and cons of those approaches for this specific tool is one of the main policy questions before us. Any other questions or comments at this stage? Otherwise, we'll ask for the next slides to continue. And I don't see any more questions right now, so thank you, and we'll welcome the next set of slides.
Okay. All right. So we can move to slide 9. So we presented the previous market and affordability analysis to stakeholders and incorporated their feedback into the following recommendations. Next slide. The city is recommending the prioritization of perpetually affordable homeownership programs. The PAH program will diversify perpetually affordable options. The goal of this is to be more accessible for low-wealth households and BIPOC developers. To that end, the city will continue to support critical partners such as CLCLT. The program will apply to new construction and acquisition of existing homes. We believe proposals for acquisition are essential to maximizing the efficient use of subsidy because the cost is significantly less than building new units. The program will serve lower AMI, specifically those below 60 and 40% of AMI. Next slide. The program will serve households with incomes at or below 80%, 60%, and 40% of AMI. Income limits correspond with HUD income limits and will vary by household size. For each of those income limits, the below market affordable price will be predetermined using Met Council assumptions for what is affordable for households earning 70%, 50%, and 30% of AMI. This would increase the pool of eligible buyers by making it more likely that someone below 80% of AMI, but above 61% of AMI could afford the below market price. So for example, let's take a 4-person household at 60% of AMI, earning, let's say, around $60,000 a year. The affordable price for that household and any 4-person household earning between 41% and 60% of AMI would be $170,000. That affordable price is calculated using the annual income of a 4-person household earning 50% of AMI. This is because if we set the price at what's affordable for a household at 60% of AMI, it's possible that it might not be affordable to households at 52% of AMI or 48% of AMI that also can't income qualify for the 40% of AMI bracket. Below market prices will vary by the size of the unit or number of bedrooms to take into account the varying incomes and purchasing power of different sized households. You can move to slide 12. This program will provide substantially more subsidy than what has been provided previously, making it feasible to fund the ever-increasing project and affordability gap without the need for outside subsidy. Removing complexity in funding projects will make the program more accessible to smaller or BIPOC developers. The city will continue to encourage the use of outside subsidy, whether to further reduce the affordable price or increase the purchasing power of eligible households. But we think it's important for the program to be accessible without the need of additional subsidy. Having a single combined subsidy will will also make administration easier for the city and more predictable for developers. The subsidy limits you see here vary by the size of the unit or the number of bedrooms to account for variations in development costs and affordable pricing for different sized homes and households. These limits will be updated annually by the city using Met Council assumptions and HUD income limits. It should be noted that increasing the subsidy not only makes this program more accessible to BIPOC developers, it also expands the capacity of existing administrators to continue doing the great work that they've been doing. You can move to slide 13. A question we asked the community was, how much should we prioritize perpetual affordability? For most, we heard a very strong desire to create perpetual affordability throughout Minneapolis as a citywide strategy, which drove our recommendations to expand projects types and perpetual affordable housing options. However, we also heard that North Minneapolis, where most city-owned land is concentrated, you see the twin effects of the foreclosure crisis and a tornado led to a significant reduction in community ownership of land. Something we heard from the community members in North Minneapolis was that the city should continue to have an option for wealth building opportunity of down payment financing, which is recaptured upon sale and does not layer affordability restrictions. In North Minneapolis, housing prices in many areas are still naturally affordable to households below 80% of AMI. In these communities, project gap, or the difference between total development cost and market value, is more necessary and is forgiven upon sale to a home buyer. A 3-bedroom home constructed in near North community could be valued at approximately $285,000. And as a result, the affordability gap to a home buyer could be as little as $20,000, or roughly a 7% discount. While in contrast, the same home in Nokomis could appraise for $350,000, simply because of the different market conditions in that neighborhood. In this case, affordability gap is $85,000, or roughly a 24% discount. We recommend continuing a recapture program only in North Minneapolis for projects that are naturally affordable due to the market conditions and require a 15% discount or less. The theory is that it seems unfair to apply PAH restrictions if there is not a substantial direct subsidy to that home buyer. And applying perpetual affordable housing restrictions when a home buyer accesses a home with a minimum of 20% discount in purchase price. Next slide. To create perpetual affordability, units will be subject to a 30-year term of affordability that resets at each resale. If a homeowner owns the home for the full term, they can either record a new 30-year covenant, sell the home to the city or a qualified buyer, or make a payment to the city for the portion of their appreciation and value of the home that would remain with the home should it be resold at the resale restricted price. Next slide. Arguably, the most important element of a program that provides perpetual affordability is the resale formula. Given the feedback we received during our engagement with stakeholders and practitioners, we wanted to recommend something that is transparent for both homeowners and administrators, providing a predictable opportunity for wealth building, and most important, a formula that created perpetual affordability through varying markets. The city's formula would increase the below market price by 2% annually. This is the maximum price that a homeowner could sell a home for in the future. As long as the AMI in Minneapolis continues to grow at a compound rate, annual growth rate of 2% or more, the resale formula will keep homes affordable to the same income group served at the initial sale. However, there is the chance that the compound annual growth rate at resale could drop below 2%, and some affordability could be lost. So a home may be affordable to a household at, say, 55% of AMI rather than 50% of AMI. Next slide. As Roxanne stated earlier, the city would be reissuing an RFQ for qualified administrators. We would encourage both existing LTA providers and new administrators to apply. Non-qualified administrators would be allowed to participate in the program only through partnership with a qualified administrator. Qualified administrators would be required to market and facilitate initial sales and resales. They would also be required to monitor households and units over time. The city will be determining a fee structure that qualified administrators are allowed to charge to cover the cost of administration and stewardship. Next slide. Ownership units created through the inclusionary zoning ordinance would be part of the city's PAH program and stewarded by a qualified administrator. Units will serve households at or below 80% of AMI. Affordable prices will be calculated the same way as PAH units, but will include an HOA dues calculation. After consultation with the city's attorney's office, it was determined that this could be done in a way that was consistent with the PAH program. Because the current unified housing policy states that the minimum affordability period for IZ units shall be 20 years, we recommend changing the affordability period to a 30-year term that resets at resale to mirror the term of the PAH units. And I'll pause here. And I want to just thank Roxanne and her team for all of their hard work and the engagement of the community.
Great, thank you.
Any questions? No, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. This is very interesting, and I appreciate all the work that CPED staff and Grounded Solutions have done over this over a year now. So I'm very grateful for this. This might be a little bit more of a question for the city assessor, but I'm just curious about like how maybe this has fit into the conversations. But how will permanently affordable housing impact market values overall for neighborhoods? I'm just curious if that has been discussed.
This is Roxanne Kimball. We have not had a conversation with the assessor's office about how a perpetually affordable housing unit that's created in a community would impact the market value throughout that community, we could engage the assessor's office in that question in order to respond.
Yes, I would be curious about that, because market values have been really rapidly increasing in North in the past couple of years, and so I'm curious about how the permanently affordable housing or perpetually affordable housing would impact that. But I'm also curious about the recapture approach within the markets that are rapidly increasing, like we have in Camden and near North, and because I 100% agree that we need to be having wealth creation opportunities. One of the things that's tricky for me as a council member for my community is that we want to be able to increase affordability and accessibility and stability, and also it's not fair that home ownership was used as a wealth building creation opportunity that then created these wealth disparities, and then folks, BIPOC, particularly Black folks, not being able to access that same opportunity. So I agree with with the space of needing to create wealth building opportunities. I guess that what I'm curious about though is so then are we just looking to create that first time, that person who buys the house the first time, excuse me, aiming that towards hopefully BIPOC folks who fit within that income bracket? Are we just aiming for that individual or families to be able to access the wealth creation opportunity, and then it's like then the resale could be potentially to somebody who makes way more money than that and maybe is not a person of color? I just wanted to get clarification about kind of like what is the intention, and with rapidly increasing markets, if there isn't any sort of intentionality around that, like it might not be able to, the second home buyer might not be able to reap those same wealth creation opportunities. So I was just curious about the thoughts on that.
Councilmember Cunningham, I'd say you have perfectly framed the tension that exists between the wealth building opportunity that's created through a recapture program, which does only have requirements that are connected to the first sale of that unit of housing, and the sort of ongoing control over each resale that exists for perpetually affordable housing. It's one of the items that we debated the most, I would say, amongst our staff discussion, and we also asked for a lot of community input and feedback. What's before you is what we think represents a reflection of the community feedback that we received, but council could certainly make a decision to say we think perpetually affordable housing is more important, and we don't want to see a recapture option.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And understandably, I think the slide presentation mostly had to do with this restrictive deed 2% increase. But we've also, I think, in the RCA, talking about how we will continue to use the land trust model. Could you just remind us and tell us a little bit about maybe when we would use the land trust? And I think people probably understand how that's a little bit different. Usually there's an opportunity, though, for some equity to be built up, and a lot of people who buy a land trust house actually sell it for more, and then they bought it for and then they move on and maybe buy another house that doesn't have a land trust. So looking kind of globally at it all, how many home ownership options do you think would potentially go the route of the deed restriction with the 2%? And the land trust, and how are we going to decide and divide it up like that? Have we thought about that much yet?
Councilmember Gordon, I would say because we haven't launched our city model yet, it's hard to predict how many folks would choose that option versus the land trust option. The way, or for that matter, versus creating a third option. We are working to ensure that something we heard specifically from community members was that they wanted us to have openness to a cooperative housing model, for example, coming forward with their own model and their own structure. What I can say is currently the experience of our program is that roughly 20% of the units that we're creating are through City of Lakes Community Land Trust. We're hopeful that the restructuring that we're framing is going to increase the number of units that are created through the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. And we're hoping that having an additional alternative of the city-sponsored formula is going to help to meet the needs of some of the community members that framed that the City of Lakes Community Land Trust model simply won't work for their community or for their needs.
Now, is there another group that's using a land trust model that we could potentially see as I forget what the technical term was, but as a approved vendor for this or an entity like that?
There certainly could be. Our intention, sorry, Councilmember Gordon, yes, there certainly could be. Our intention is to do a broad-based RFP for qualified administrators in order to try and have a diverse cross-section of organizations that are helping us with administering this program.
I think that would be excellent, and probably doesn't necessarily require a staff direction or anything. But my other question was, if we do open it to the deed kind of restriction model, when will we be evaluating the success of that? When will we look at that and maybe can look back and see if it worked and what did it open up and how many folks chose that? And I'd like to, I guess, have a check-in reasonably soon. And I know these things roll out very slowly, but even in a year would seem reasonably soon. But have you thought about that and when we'll be evaluating whether or not it's effective?
Yes, Councilmember Gordon. Generally speaking, we're constantly evaluating our programs and making adjustments. We expect to continue that practice. We framed that in 2024, we'd like to step back and do a more comprehensive evaluation of is the effect of these policy changes that we're recommending today what we're expecting, or are we missing the mark of where we're trying to make a difference in our outcomes? But I expect that annually we'll be reflecting on what's happening successfully in our programs.
Well, that's excellent. And I just want to thank you and all the staff at CPED and the others for all their work on this. I actually think the staff reports are rather thorough. I really appreciated the racial equity work that was done and was shared on the reports. I think that was very helpful. I want to apologize to my colleagues that we don't have normal operating committee structures. This certainly would have been something that would have come to the Housing Committee for a longer discussion and possibly with briefings for each committee member before it actually went there. I know it's very complicated. I'm so glad we were able to have a study session in person while we could still meet in person. But I think this is a great body of work, and I think it represents a lot of detail and nuance so that we're carefully stepping into some new territories, but that are more consistent with what we're after, while I'm certainly open to making some tweaks, and we're working on it between now and, or even now, but for the purpose of this meeting, I'd like to move both items. I think it was 45 and 46 at this time for discussion, and so we can have it before us to consider properly.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon, who has moved both of the items. Is there any further discussion on them? And Councilmember Gordon, I had put in the chat the associated items with the first of these two. The motion on the second of the two items also is relatively detailed, which is also available in the agenda in LIMS. While I see if there's any other questions or comments on the motion, I did want to ask just a couple more things. One is, what happens in the event of a foreclosure, given the financing tools that you're proposing using for the 2% option? Is my first question.
I think I may need to come back, and off the top of my head right in this moment, I don't have a ready answer, but I know it's something that we've answered in this process. So if I could come back to you, Councilmember Bender, with that response, I'd appreciate it.
For sure, thank you, and not intended to be a quiz by any means, but I think understanding a little bit better the options around that financing tool, and especially just with the ups and downs that we're seeing in our market, and understanding that scenario with the foreclosure and kind of how the city, what risk the city would be taking on, and what tools we would have to prevent foreclosure would be really helpful, I think, before the council meeting. And I also just wanted to kind of land the two, since the two items both dealt with this question around the 80%, I just want to clarify that if we decided, for example, to say we're not going to pursue the 80% option from the first presentation, that would likely mean that we would be making the decision to prioritize housing affordability, and therefore would be also choosing along with that the perpetual affordable option. So that's kind of how the two presentations and the two policy questions go together. Does that sound correct?
Yes, yes, that sounds correct.
Or feel free to elaborate or clarify.
Yeah,
for sure.
So what I would say is, if this council decides that recapture is an option that you don't want to pursue, that you want all units of housing that are created through this program to be perpetually affordable, what it would mean is in communities that are currently naturally affordable to someone who's between 61 and 80% of area median income, in order for a housing unit to qualify for financing through our program, they would need to serve a lower income tier. So someone who's below 60% or 40%, in order to ensure that they're achieving that minimum 20% direct discount or direct benefit to a household. There's sort of a separate decision, I would say, about serving 61 to 80% AMI households throughout the city. There are other markets in the city that are not currently accessible to households that are between 61 and 80%. And it would just mean a difference in subsidy need in those communities.
Great, thank you. And I know we've covered this point many times, but I think it is important both for, of course, the council members, but for the public to understand kind of how the different models and the different AMIs translate into kind of plain language policy questions. So thanks for doing that so many times in this meeting. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. And, I absolutely appreciate this presentation and all the efforts to really create affordable home ownership and perpetually affordable home ownership, though, as you just noted, markets fluctuate. And so the perpetualness could shift. So I wanted to just make a couple of philosophical points. We really need to be working on income, and I mean, to me, that seems to be the glaring problem. And I know we have, raised $15 minimum wage, but the issues of structural racism don't really go away. If the price of building a home continues to go up, the area median income continues to go up, but the people at the lowest rung of the income ladder are the people who we are helping. It seems like the problem is perpetual. So, and maybe that's stating the obvious, I'm not sure. Home ownership, a wonderful byproduct of home ownership is, you generate income, or not income, actually, you generate wealth, potentially. But just as that, you could potentially generate wealth, you could potentially lose wealth. Real estate prices don't always stay constant. And so I hope people are recognizing that. I mean, particularly, we talked to community members and they said, the land trust model doesn't work for me because I want to maximize my profits, but you also then take on the risk of losing as well. And I just think that needs to be clear as we are moving down this path. And really, we need to be, as a society, I'm not sure if this is a city council issue, unless we raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour. But how do we get more income in these low income communities? Because as long as they remain perpetually in these low income jobs, this problem persists.
Okay, thank you, Council Vice President. And thanks for all of the questions and comments and all of the work from staff on this item. I don't see any more comments, and we have several more items ahead, so I will ask the clerk to please call the roll on these two items.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and will be forwarded to the City Council, of course, between now and then. Any follow-up or particular amendments that council members may want to bring could come to the council meeting. Of course, I think especially in this virtual environment, the more time, the better that can be given for council members to look through any amendments that may come. So thanks everyone for that discussion. The next item is number 47, which is an update regarding the 911 Minneapolis Police Department work group. And we'll have Brian Smith from the City Coordinator's Office leading that update. I'll make sure that after that very long discussion that we have the Coordinator's Office staff ready to go, and we'll welcome Mr. Smith when you are ready.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Council Vice President. Actually, I am not leading the discussion today. That's being led by my supervisor, Andrea Larson, and Gina Allen from my office, who's a program manager who coordinates the 911 MPD work group. They'll both be giving that presentation. So
Great. Thank you. Welcome, and thanks to both of you.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Bender and council members. I'm Andrea Larson, Director of Strategic Management in the City Coordinator's Office. I'll be presenting an update on the 911 MPD workgroup progress, and I'm joined here today by Gina Allen, who's a program manager on the performance and innovation team leading this work. Next slide. I'll briefly walk you through the background of the work group, then we'll turn it over to Gina to go over the current work since the recommendations were presented last fall. Next slide. And next slide. Last fall, a work group was formed to analyze dispatch call categories to determine whether there were opportunities to expand the city's ability to respond to 911 calls beyond the Minneapolis Police Department. The group met 4 times throughout the fall to analyze data and to raise scope and vet ideas for alternative response. Council took the recommendations and issued a staff direction to engage in 2 studies and to move forward with prototyping for a subset of call categories. Next slide. These were the recommendations that came out of the work group last fall. On the left, you'll see examples of some of the ideas that were surfaced during the ideation phase of the work group. And on the right were the recommendations of what to move forward from the work group. In blue at the bottom were recommendations that could move into implementation phase without further study. We removed expanding co-responders as that ultimately was an expansion of police response. But theft report only calls with attention required to certain operational aspects could move forward to implementation. The other ideas, which Gina will discuss in a moment, are in gray and have been the focus of the work group since last fall. Before I turn it over to Gina to talk about the work since the end of the year, are there any questions? Hearing none, I'll turn it over to Gina Allen to talk about the work after last fall.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Ms. Allen.
Thank you, Andrea, and hello, Council President Bender and council members. I'm Gina Allen, Program Manager in the Office of Performance and Innovation, and I'll now discuss the current focus of our work and why the work group decided to focus on these areas. As I'm going through this, feel free to ask me any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. Thank you. To date, the studies and prototyping are both underway and on parallel tracks. While they are all ongoing, progress in the 2 studies will inform the work of the prototyping alternative responses. The Problem Nature Code, or PNC study, will review the current list of PNCs and their priority code assignments to determine the most appropriate way to categorize calls for service in Minneapolis. It will also evaluate risk levels to provide us with a better understanding of what a low-risk request for service would look like. We will then be able to use this information in developing alternative responses while helping to ensure that we keep both residents and responders safe. The Staffing and Efficiency Study may also inform the prototyping process by providing a look into what resources may be available moving forward. Next slide, please. The 2 areas that were scoped as a focus for prototyping this year were reporting calls and emotionally disturbed person, also known as EDP or mental health crisis calls. Reporting call codes are low-risk calls for service that generally revolve around theft, property damage, and parking or traffic issues. They are a relatively small volume, but take up a greater share of time than the volume they represent. These are low-hanging fruit categories to explore. EDP is a more complicated category and is larger in volume and time and represents core competencies outside of traditional police training. It is of high priority that we are sending responders to these calls who have a strong mental health skill set so that residents get the support that is most appropriate for their needs. Review of available data shows that most of these calls pose no threat of imminent harm and did not have a weapon involved. Given these factors, this area rose to the top of the list to explore for sending non-MPD responders to. Next slide, please. I'll now give an overview of the process we're using to explore the alternatives to MPD response, and the steps we will be completing in the coming months. This slide shows the steps of the inclusive design process that we're using. During this process, we center those who are most impacted by our work. In this case, we're talking about Minneapolis residents. However, EDP calls do disproportionately impact BIPOC residents. We want to design our solutions with community and other stakeholders involved so that we don't force our predetermined solutions on them. Currently, we are in the discover and understand stages of the process and have been engaging residents and visitors to better understand their experiences and hear what types and characteristics of services they would like to see. We are connecting the dots of all of our research and prepare for designing new response to these calls. Next slide, please.
Madam President.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President. Can we actually go back 2 slides on this? I have a clarifying question. Back 1 more, please. I guess it would be back 1. Yeah, perfect. All right, so just to clarify for the public that's following along, when we see 5 to 10% of officer time spent on calls for mental health crisis calls, and then 10 to 15% for report-only calls, should that be interpreted as 15 to 25% of total officer time from the total pool of officers is spent between these 2 categories of calls?
Councilmember Johnson, yes, you are interpreting that correctly.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, and apologies to my colleagues who had jumped in with questions. Also, we have Councilmember Cunningham in queue with a question or comment.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to get clarification for the mental health crisis calls. Is that specifically just EDP calls, or does that include wellness checks that involve mental health, a potential mental health crisis?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Cunningham. That does not include wellness checks. That is a separate problem nature code.
Thank you, because I just want to be able to name that Travis Jordan, he had police interaction that ultimately led to his death due to a wellness check related to his mental health. So I understand that's a different, classified differently, but it really falls within a similar need, and so I just wanted to make sure to name that, because that's a particular issue, given that he was my resident, that I would really like for us to think about how are we also addressing wellness checks that are related to mental health. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Councilmember Cunningham. That is an excellent point. The work group did start with these 2 areas of problem nature codes, and has the ability, depending on council direction, to expand that into looking into the other problem nature codes that would include wellness checks.
If I may, I wanted to jump in with a follow-up question on this topic, and it's okay if the answer is to follow up further with council members, but my understanding is that Hennepin County has a pilot program underway now related to responding to 911 calls with a particularly focused on mental health, but that they've kind of shifted their staffing approach within the 911 call center itself. Is there anything more you can tell us about that, either now or again for follow-up?
Thank you for that question, Council President Bender. I would have to follow up with that question, and I can certainly do that with all council members after the meeting.
Great, thank you for that. I don't see any more questions at this time. Thank you for pausing to take those.
No problem. And if we could go to slide 9. All right. So this slide shows the steps of the inclusive design process that we're using. I'm sorry, I did this slide already. Slide 11. To provide a little more detail about the discover and understand stages, normally we'd engage in personal conversation with folks who directly receive the service in combination with surveys to gain a deeper understanding of the user experience. Just as we were about to engage in this process, COVID-19 interrupted us. That slowed the project down temporarily as we adjusted to a new way of life and doing our work. We pivoted by focusing on the survey that could be completed while ensuring the safety of residents and staff. Keeping it open longer and doing multiple targeted push outs is allowing us to receive a lot of useful resident feedback and still make this piece of the process rigorous. Some of the organizations that we worked with to push them out include NAMI Minnesota, which is the National Alliance on Mental Health, Black Visions Collective, Reclaim the Block, the Minneapolis Trans Equity Council, and the Minneapolis Urban League. While there are limitations to this adjusted approach, we still feel confident that this will be a valuable human-centered process to designing new alternative responses. Next slide, please. The next steps in the process are to create an experiment. This is the fun part where we envision what ideal support would look like for these, This is the fun part where we envision what ideal support for these 911 calls could look like. We encourage folks to ignore constraints and be creative. We then can work to quickly and with low cost do enactments of these, also known as prototypes, to ensure that we work out large challenges before rolling out a new service in real life. We can then take out some of the ideas and pilot them by making changes on a small but real life scale and with minimal harm before completely rolling them out to the entire city. This is similar to beta testing of an app and is a really important part of the change and innovation process. Next slide, please. This brings us to our timeline and what you can expect in November. We plan to come with recommendations for what new responses to EDP and reporting calls that should be piloted in 2021. Again, pilots are still somewhat of a test environment. They are the beginning of operationalizing on a larger scale by shifting from what should we do to actually doing something. Next slide, please. That's the end of the presentation that we have prepared for you. There's additional information included in the appendix, including very early budget estimates that can give you a ballpark of the costs associated with the call categories we're focusing on. We are working to refine these for November. Thank you for having me today, and I am available for any other questions along with the rest of my team.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I know we didn't get into the budget numbers, and it looks like, and based off of what you just said, that these would be refined a little further. I did see them in the appendix here for EDP calls, and it just seemed kind of a magnitude below what I would expect when we looked at slide, I think it was 6 earlier, around 5 to 10% of officers' time spent on mental health crisis calls, but then in the appendix it suggests that the total cost of these calls yearly is under $500,000, which if it's 5 to 10% of the total time of officers from our patrol units, that would be 25 to 50 officers worth of time, I would imagine, per year. And so yes, maybe just some clarity on that, and I'm happy to chat more offline on that, but it just seemed like it didn't quite seem to make sense to me why that number would not be a lot higher in terms of the total cost that we would save by changing the response and what it costs today.
Council President, I can address that question. This is Brian.
Thank you.
And sorry for calling you Vice President the first time somebody called me. So the Councilmember Johnson, you're absolutely correct. So there was a little bit of a mistake made earlier about this slide. that's for problem nature codes, priority category 0 through 3. So it's not total volume of calls. It's just for a particular subset of calls in priority nature code category 0 through 3. So that's why when you look at the math, it's not a total volume of calls. So that was just a mistake made on our part in the presentation, but it's actually for a particular subset of a problem nature code and not all call volume.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, and I just want to emphasize again here the opportunity. I mean, just between these two categories, 15 to 25% of total officer time is a huge amount of calls, a huge volume, and a huge opportunity to have potentially better, more efficient responses and a higher quality of service for our residents. And so it's really promising work that's being done, and I really appreciate it in the presentation.
We also have, I think, 911 Director Kathy Hughes on the line, who, because of the nature of how the problem nature codes work and how they're divided, may be able to give a little bit more specificity to it if she's on the line. So if she cares to speak to that, because you also have EDP, which is category 1, and report only is category 3, and EDP is priority 1 within that. So if Kathy's on the line and would like to speak to it, it might give some clarity as well.
Was there a specific question about it besides the category?
Hi, Director Hughes, welcome. Councilmember Johnson, do you want to reiterate a question for the director?
Yeah, thank you, Council President. Really, the question was related in the appendix for this presentation, which is posted out on LIMS. There were estimated total costs of, for instance, responding to an an EDP call, emotionally disturbed person call, and we know that if those calls represent 5 to 10% of officer time spent on calls, with the number of patrol officers, that's at least 25 to 50 officers worth of time per year. So I would imagine that we'd actually be talking about a total cost in the millions of dollars, not less than $500,000, which is on the slide. It sounds like that, according to Director Smith, that's a known maybe calculation error or a subset of data that makes up that discrepancy. But I just wanted to call it out and seek clarity on this, and really recognizing that, in fact, this volume of calls is a very significant portion of the work being done today by officers between both the mental health calls and the report-only calls.
Councilmember Johnson, I was not part of making these slides, and I'm not sure where they came up with the metrics. Brian did just say they didn't use total call volume, which possibly could be looked at, and we could get back to you on that number.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to recognize how valuable this work is and how much work has gone into it over now a year and a half since we started, this process. And I think it's really promising and, I think exciting to many of us who had hoped for an outcome like this to start to see things that are moving into the implementable phase. And so I think there's a lot to feel very good about here. And I also think that it's important, just to recognize that I think that there's been a sense of anxiety as we've had a conversation about transforming public safety, and as we sort of think about what that process is going to look like. I think there's been a concern from people who are new to the conversation that we might not have done our homework or that we might not know what we're talking about. And this is actually a very good example of the kind of kind of deep data-driven work that this whole city enterprise is engaged in to really think about how to do public safety better. And I think that's an exciting thing for us to put forward. I think I'm really glad we have a chance to highlight this here. And just wanted to signal to my colleagues that I'm bringing forward a staff direction tomorrow at the budget committee that's really geared towards just making sure that this work doesn't get lost. So one of the frustrations that we heard from some community members in the last budget cycle was that we got some really terrific recommendations from this work group that people had put a lot of time into, and they came forward on a timeline that it was very difficult to actually implement in time for the set of budget decisions that were in front of us in November and December. And so the goal here is to create a timeline and a process for us to get enough information to be able to act, including prompting department heads to take a first run at looking at what's implementable, even in the next week and a half, to see if there are implementable ideas as we've been sort of thinking through this work, things that people have already identified that could be done in departments that are worth piloting, that are worth starting to do the work of experimenting and trying out. And so I'm excited to get those conversations going. And I certainly want to make sure that as we're going into the 2021 budget cycle, we are fully informed by this study and have the opportunity to really put a great deal of the time and effort that community members and city staff have put into this into action. So I'll send that around shortly so everybody can see it. And if you have questions, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me and we can discuss it tomorrow in budget committee. But I wanted to preview the intention to provide a little additional guidance around this to make sure that we're getting information in a timely way and are able to move some of these ideas into action.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, and just want to note and appreciate that you worked with both myself and Budget Chair Palmisano to work out the appropriate timing and place for that staff direction. So thank you. I know I'm noting the time of 3:45 and we have two more pretty significant items, and then another meeting of one of the boards and commissions begins at 4:30. So I know that this is a really important topic. I also want to note that many of the staff who've been involved in this work group are also part of the core team that are working on the resolution that the council brought forward a couple of cycles ago related to reimagining public safety. And I think this work will really meld into that process as well. So we'll receive an update about that at the next POGO meeting. So thank you to all for this presentation. I do want to just note that I think for one of the items for follow-up, we're starting to see a lot more cities around the country talk about taking this approach to public safety. Both Los Angeles and San Francisco, the mayors of those cities, recently announced that they would be shifting all non-criminal calls or non-violent calls, is how the two cities described them, out of having police officer response to a different model. And of course, there are existing programs in places like Eugene, Oregon, and other cities as well. So I know our staff are in touch with folks from these other cities around the country, and we're both, I think, leading in really innovative ways, and then also learning from our peer cities as we work on this together around the country. So thanks everyone for that. I will direct the clerk to receive and file this update. And thank you again to all the council members who've been involved in this, and the staff and the community members who've served on the 911 MPD work group. Our next discussion item is an update on a staff direction related to economic and rebuilding recovery strategies. This will be given by Steve Poor, the Director of Development Services, and I'll welcome Mr. Poor, again, giving some time if needed to transition to this item. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council President Bender and council members. First, I want to just say, in the interest of time, I'd like to do a very brief response, but I'll tip my hand and say I think that I'd like to come back to the committee after I gather more information. But with that, we're following up on a council direction from July 3rd, 2020 from Councilmember Johnson to look at ways that we could streamline, remove barriers, unnecessary regulations and reviews, and even possibly waiving of fees with properties and communities that suffered from the civil unrest. And so as a basis of trying to get my arms around what would be a geographic area short of the whole city, I put forth the map that was identified by OEM of the damaged properties from the unrest. And I put that out as kind of one to indicate the breadth and scope of the damage. I know many of you have seen this map and see how it's kind of spread across the city, but you can clearly see some areas suffered more substantial damage than others. And so with that, where I'd like this discussion to go, and again, I realize we're short on time and maybe more in the future, and I'm happy to come back, is some areas have experienced far more damage and substantial damage than other areas. I also know that I was on a call earlier today with our health department doing an informational meeting at the state. And one of the discussions that came up there is the city done tallying its number about damage? And that's because our legislators are looking to help craft a package. Why does that matter in today's discussion is because I feel like today's discussion is a little bit out of sync with what may or may not be done. And so what I mean by that would be that I think it might be premature for the city to talk about waiving fees and other collected permit fees if we're going to be maybe seeking aid from the state. And I'm just saying I think that we might want to take a pause on that till we see what kind of package the state is trying to put together. I'll leave that for your consideration. But what I would like to assure the city council is that immediately after the damage was surveyed and we saw the scope of what happened to many of these properties and what would be needed to rebuild them, myself and our former director did look into streamlining processes. I have been working with development services managers, particularly around the land use reviews and demolition permits about how can we streamline things, how are we going to handle rebuilding, what properties had non-conforming rights that may not require a public hearing at all. We've engaged with the city attorney on the limits of our authority on that. We worked with our partners at Hennepin County and the assessor's office around property taxes being due when a wrecking permit is issued. And what we found there is there's a state statute that actually requires that, state statute 272. So IGR is going to continue to work with our legislative partners on looking at the collection of property taxes on associated with wrecking permits, particularly out of these types of situations. So the other piece that we've looked at is what would be the financial implications of waiving permit fees? I don't think I need to remind you we're in the midst of some challenging budget discussions. So again, I feel like the development services staff may not be the only voice about how to handle not collecting permit fees, given all the work of the finance and budget office at this time. So I feel this conversation is maybe isn't synced up correctly right now. And that's, again, another matter that I would like to come back and have a little more time to get a fuller understanding of that in fairness to our partners in the budget office. I would say that with the amount of rebuilding that we hopefully will see, that the permit fee number will not be insignificant. And so I feel it would not be fair to our partners in the enterprise to kind of just say you can waive fees and it's going to be $1 million over a year and a half, and what are the implications of that? I think that's a better discussion after we get a little more information and talk with our partners. So I guess what I would ask is that maybe the committee gives me an opportunity to have some more conversations with our partners in the enterprise. But I do want to assure the committee that we have already taken some steps to streamline processes. We've not required the same level of detail on some wrecking permits. We're not requiring a survey by a property owner on Lake Street to rebuild. That was a requirement that really came out of many of the tear downs in the city in the past. We've not required for other certain documentation, just trying to make the process more streamlined. We have had preliminary conversations with folks who want to rebuild about looking at the ability to do things administratively. And so I'd like to say that. I'd also like to offer one other observation. I think that we have to be mindful of equity in this. So there are partners in the business community who are well capitalized and well insured, who are prepared to come into our processes as they exist. But we have others that I think are still trying to work through insurance issues and other complicated financial issues. And so I appreciate the sentiment of this council direction, but I think that we need to maybe take a pause and do a little more research on it, converse internally with the enterprise. But again, I just want to say it a third time, we're doing our best to streamline things and make it easier for folks who want to engage with us, and we will continue down that path. And so with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you so much. I have a quick follow-up question, and then I know Councilmember Cano has a question, I think, for Director Brennan. I wanted to ask what we're seeing in terms of citywide permits, if you have a sense of if building has slowed down with the economic impacts of coronavirus, or if we're still seeing sort of regular levels of applications for new building permits. I mean, outside of this sort of issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Council President Bender. The answer is that we are behind last year, which was a record year, but we're really not off pace much from the last 4 years. We've been trying to keep the finance office abreast of these permit activity, and even our agendas at Planning Commission have had hundreds of dwelling units on them. We had another very full Planning Commission the past Monday. And so while things are down from last year, which again was a record year for us, and the year before that was just below a record year, and the year before that was the record year. So we're actually within a 5-year window, we've been keeping pace with past activity. One of the things that we've seen over time is that sometimes when we get drastic changes like we're experiencing now in the economy, we may not see as much new construction, but we often see more remodeling. And so we're trying to verify, but we think we're seeing maybe less single family home construction, but we're seeing more remodeling permits on existing homes. And that's a trend we've seen. I've seen that over my 30 years here in the past. There's just a trade-off, and it makes sense. People may not move, but they reinvest in their home. So we're tracking that permit activity closely and keeping the finance office apprised of that. But we'd be happy to report back to this committee as well about that activity.
Thank you, Mr. Boer, and I'll recognize Councilmember Cano. I mean, part of the point there is, I think we want to be careful that we don't streamline something that we don't want, which would be, displacement or, not having the tools in place to keep the current business owners, having the tools that they need to rebuild. So, Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate you calling on me. I did want to echo Mr. Poor's comments about racial equity when pertaining to this work. I think clarifying the intent that we want to level the playing field by ensuring that our support as a city, whether it's waiving a fee or expediting a certain process, that it's really prioritizing the folks who we traditionally identify as populations within a racial equity category. So for example, we know that large corporations that are international or national franchises were impacted on Lake Street, whether it's McDonald's or Arby's and others that might have suffered a complete burning down or loss of their buildings. We might, want to ask ourselves, is that the kind of Is that the kind of company that we are trying to support, or do we want to prioritize supporting the small, locally owned, diverse and immigrant-led and people of color-owned businesses? And so I agree that we need to do a little bit more parsing out of how we prioritize the programming and the distribution of our shrinking city resources. On a separate topic that's related to this, I'm curious what plans CPED might have underway already relating to how we support the small local business owners who are wanting to open up but can't open up because they just don't have the cash flow. And so today I was at a meeting on Lake Street hosted by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who was doing a listening session on the impact that the civil unrest had on our cultural patrimony, a lot of these cultural businesses. And many of them said, we need to bring in some cash in the door so we can operate, and we can't open up our businesses because we don't have the cash flow to fix the doors, fix the windows, fix the facade, replenish the goods that were stolen, replenish the cash that was in the cash registers that were taken or the computers that were taken. So I'm just curious if either our interim director, Andrea Brennan, can speak to that, or maybe somebody else in either the small business team, or I don't know if Eric Hansen is here. But I'd love to just get caught up on sort of where that work is from the city level, if we're anticipating to be able to distribute grants at that level to really just kind of kickstart that economic activity again.
Council President Bender and Councilmember Kano, if I may, while maybe somebody else from CPED could speak to that, I would like to just acknowledge that the issues you've raised, staff has thought about. We are concerned about the equity of how we apply these relaxations. We're very sensitive about the different narratives out there about what rebuilding looks like. We have to juggle that, juxtapose that against state law for nonconformities that they have certain rights to rebuild. But internally, we've had very robust discussions about that, about what does rebuilding look like. Very sensitive to that. And with that, I'm not sure if there's another CPED staff member available to address the small business concerns.
Thank you for that. Is anyone available to speak to the broader package of grants or cash aid?
Sure. This is Andrea Brennan, Interim Director of CPED. Madam President, Councilmember Kano, this is an area where the Commercial Property Development Fund would be very effective. So those guidelines were previously proposed as part of the budget presentation earlier today. That is a fund that does have budget authority in 2020. So that is an area where the city could provide some assistance. Additionally, there is a request to the Small Business Association to have the disaster declarations in place to again provide access for additional funding. There's discussions with the state about the state potentially through legislative action identifying some disaster recovery funds that could be critical for businesses. And our city staff, including our economic development director and his team and our IGR staff, have been very involved in conversations with as well as several of you and the mayor's staff, involved in conversations with key legislators in this area to ensure that any state funds that would be made available would be very flexible to meet non-traditionally banked needs of businesses. So there's other work that is occurring to help provide additional resources that we can follow up on as well.
Thank you. And thank you, Director, for jumping in today and into this role of interim director. I know your work has been very focused on housing, so thank you for jumping in and now, taking the lead on all of these many issues of work that CPED is leading right now. Council Member Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate the update from Director Poor and the concerns that he laid out, as well as some of the thoughts that my colleagues have shared, particularly around navigating this work in a racially equitable way. I have to say, I've received calls from business owners, small business owners, independent local business owners who lost everything in the civil unrest, their source of livelihood and support for their family, all the investment they put in to our community and into providing jobs and everything. And they feel like this is a theme that they have seen before, where when they approach the city, sometimes there's a sense of almost like an indifference, because they feel like, wow, we've really lost everything here, and now we're not even going to be made whole in some cases on cleanup for wrecking and removal of their burnt down buildings. And then when they go to the city saying, all right, can we proceed with wrecking, they're told, you're going to have to pay thousands of dollars just for a permit for that. And so we have really exceptional circumstances here. And I understand the different concerns and ways we want to think about this, but I think this is really an opportunity for the city to say, we understand what happened, and we can't turn back the clock and change this outcome, but what we can do at least is provide some flexibility around our permit process, and I appreciate that to the degree that the director said he was able to work on that already, and the pieces that have happened around that. In some cases, to waive administrative fees if that's something that we can do, which, by the way, we didn't in our fee scheduling anticipate these particular permits coming in. So this is merely a matter of staff time for staff that are already employed, and it's within our capacity to do. I think that's something that we should step up and do, and then work to help prioritize folks who have lost everything, get them up to the front of the line when it comes to applications or permits, so we can get them back up and running, whereas others maybe are trying to expand an existing business that wasn't impacted, that sort of thing. And first come, first serve, they understand that, but I think they also understand that there's a special need here for those that have been so drastically impacted to be able to get some additional support. So I understand that Director Poor is looking for more time on this. I think that's reasonable, but I do hope we can come back with recommendations on how we can really proactively help. I think it's really unfortunate that, I've been fielding calls from folks that aren't even in Ward 12 that say, I haven't even heard from anybody at the city yet. And they really feel, not only did they feel abandoned during the civil unrest, but they feel abandoned afterwards. And I don't think that's right. And I think we have to step up and do more about it.
Thank you, Council Member, and of course, thank you for your efforts, usually as our IGR chair, at really advocating for the city and even more than the city, the business owners who have lost so much with our legislative delegation, and to bring those state resources hopefully to this as well. I don't see any other council members in queue, so I will go ahead and direct the clerk to receive and file this update. I do want to note, I said this again, I think maybe in the last POGO meeting, I do feel a sense of urgency about formalizing the different council working groups that are doing work related to economic development. So I will follow up as promised about that. I've had a couple of conversations just getting a sense of what's happening and who's involved and what the pace and cadence of the meetings. But I do think we should bring something through council more formally to designate council members and contemplate if we should have sort of one group working on economic recovery wholly, combined, or if there want to be different groups focused on more, short-term, long-term, different topics. So I see Councilmember Gordon in queue.
And I think that's an excellent idea, and I'm certainly trying to coordinate with other council members near Lake Street, particularly near the Second Ward. But it also occurs to me that I think we're a little disconnected from some of the initiatives the mayor's office might be doing around these as well. And I don't know that this is the right time to direct staff to help us coordinate there or how to do that exactly. But I just sort of want to note it here, because I hear from constituents and business owners along there trying to ask and find out what's happening with the mayor's office with this or that initiative. And I'm not sure exactly what it is they're talking about, or I don't know all the details. And so we're still trying to get our arms all around this. Appreciate this report from staff. I think that's one way we can get coordinated, but maybe we can get it a little tighter next time.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I agree. I think we do want to make sure that department staff are leading the work of economic recovery. So I agree. Okay, so directed staff clerk to receive and file that report. We do have one item left on our agenda, which is from our equity subcommittee. It's a resolution declaring racism a public health emergency in the city of Minneapolis. And I'll ask Chair Jenkins to introduce this proposal again as part of our equity subcommittee of this body. Thank you, Council Vice President.
Thank you, Madam President. And I am really thrilled to be able to bring forward this this resolution proposal today. I do want to just comment on your last statement and agree with you. You know, there are several seemingly efforts happening around economic recovery, and I have been involved in some of those, but I've really made it real clear that we need to coordinate these efforts more. So any work that I can do to help bring some level of coordination and collaboration to that process, I will be working on as well, and look forward to working with you and others to make that happen. Today, I am bringing one item for the Equity Subcommittee agenda, which is listed as item number 49, and it's a consideration of a resolution declaring a public health emergency in the city of Minneapolis, and more specifically declaring racism as a public health emergency in the city of Minneapolis. We've seen the tragic death of George Floyd. We just got a presentation on the horrendous gaps in home ownership. Every time we hear a report around COVID-19, it reminds us that Black and Brown, disabled communities are more vulnerable to the disease than the broader community, and all of those issues it has been deeply agreed upon that at the core is racism. And so how do we begin to address and end racism? And I think the first step in that process is through naming that as an issue. And so we do have staff on hand, and I do want to just acknowledge that we have a limited amount of time. This is a very important topic, and hopefully we can have a broader discussion at some point in the future. But there is staff on hand, as well as we invited some speakers to come in support. And so we'll hear first from Ms. Joy Marsh-Stevens, the Director of the Division of Race and Equity, and then Gretchen Musicant, our Health Commissioner, and Amelia Brown, as well as Hennepin County Commissioner Angela Conley. And I do want to just note for those on the phone, I believe Amelia and Commissioner Conley are both on the phone. When it's your turn to speak, just be sure to press *6. So Miss Mar Stevens, if you are available, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair Jenkins. I will keep my remarks very short. Just first want to acknowledge deep gratitude for your leadership and Councilmember Cunningham's leadership in getting this resolution to where it is today. Definitely want to acknowledge the large number of staff, including Voices from Community and some community partner organizations who have helped us to strengthen this language. As you mentioned, we do have several speakers here who are going to speak to the significance of this resolution. We will start with we'll start with Commissioner Angela Connolly, followed by Amelia Brown, who's speaking on behalf of her organization, Emergency Arts. And then lastly, we'll hear from Commissioner Gretchen Musicant from the Health Department.
Good afternoon, Madam President, council members. My name is Angela Conley, and I'm a proud resident of the 8th Ward of Minneapolis. I am the County Commissioner for Hennepin County's 4th District. And I just want to start by saying I know that you all have been working on this for some time, so I really appreciate your work, Council Vice President Jenkins and Councilmember Cunningham. You know, racism is not only a social determinant of health. Racism kills people. Structural and institutional racism built on policies, laws, and antiquated ordinances, such as the now defunct spitting and lurking ordinances, is at the root of disparities in health outcomes between Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color and their white counterparts. Being racially profiled, being discriminated against, not having adequate access to healthcare and housing, all of these things reduce the health outcomes and well-being of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. So as many of you know, myself and Commissioner Fernando of District 2 wrote a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis within Hennepin County as a whole. This resolution was able to pass by the board 4-3 and is now in effect. As you also know, currently Minneapolis has its own public health authority, and I urge you to approve a declaration of racism as a public health emergency so that we and others can partner to dismantle the devastating and fatal consequences of systemic, institutional, and explicit racism. You cannot dismantle disparities without first dismantling racism. Thank you so much for your time and all of your hard work. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Conley, for that support, and congratulations on passing that resolution at Hennepin County. It's going to be critical that we, as the city and the county, work together to end these disparities and to attack the scourge of racism in our communities. And hopefully this will encourage other cities within Hennepin County to do the same. Ms. Marsh Stevens.
So next we will hear from Amelia Brown from Emergency Arts.
Thank you, Madam Chair Jenkins, council members, and Joy. What is the key to community recovery? For generations, we have explored how to recover from the public health emergency of racism. We stand on colonized lands, offering respect and gratitude to the traditional stewards of this land, Dakota and Anishinaabe Ojibwe people. We offer respect and gratitude to those who have been stolen from their home and lands to build upon stolen land here. Africans, African Americans, Black people who continue to experience theft, loss, and injustice. History lives on this land and in our bodies. This resolution and related actions are one way to name and address the historical and ongoing horror, trauma, and devastation of racism. As we declare racism a public health emergency, we are able to develop communication and mobilize resources towards addressing racism in its many forms: historical, individual, internalized, interpersonal, institutional, systemic. An important aspect of addressing this emergency is community recovery. My name is Amelia Brown, founder and consultant with Emergency Arts, and today I will very briefly share a primary challenge and important key to community recovery. A primary challenge is that the public is not included in planning and execution of community recovery. A study by the New York Academy of Medicine reports that there is a need for more public involvement in emergency management planning, and assumptions about public behavior in terrorist and other emergency incidents are false. False assumptions about public behavior extend beyond one type of emergency. A study presented at the Institute for Crisis, Disaster, and Risk Management shared that a primary challenge to emergency management is there is a very large gap between the needs of the public and the plans and practices of emergency management. A report by FEMA reveals that they have not been able to reach any of their goals in preparing communities for emergencies for the past 2 decades. These studies reveal some core challenges to various types of emergencies and different phases of emergencies. Plans without public involvement can fail, as assumptions about public behavior can be inaccurate, and plans not formed by those who will utilize or are impacted by those plans can have severe consequences. We saw an example of this in the failure of evacuation plans in Hurricane Katrina, which caused disaster after disaster. So how do we increase public involvement in planning and execution in community recovery? How can we apply these lessons to addressing the public health emergency of racism? Through more than 20 years of work across 4 continents, I have experienced one key to increasing public involvement in planning and execution of community recovery: art. While leading disaster recovery work in New Orleans, Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, I saw how art was critical in including people with varying abilities, backgrounds, and ages so that they could participate in recovery as well. While some people were able to rebuild houses, others could paint homes and murals. Local residents shared that they were living in a fog and states of deep depression for months until they were able to share their stories through writing and performing plays. While working in New Zealand after earthquakes, I saw how artists were critical in a public health campaign aimed at normalizing conversations about well-being and mental health. That campaign reached 70% of the disaster-impacted population, and of those who were surveyed, 93% shared the campaign helped people think about their well-being, and 85% shared that they had done activities suggested in the campaign specifically to improve their well-being. Here in Minneapolis, artists have been on the front lines of the public health emergency of racism, including the Black Lives Matter movement, protests, memorials, honoring the life of George Floyd, and many, many other beautiful human beings who have lost their lives in our streets, in our homes, in our cars, and in our communities. We know the power of artists to communicate honor, grief, and justice, to transform our communities through murals that have covered our city. But do you know the power of artists to transform the culture and systems that have covered this city with some of the worst racial disparities in the country? These examples reveal art is one key to increasing public involvement in community recovery. Artists can implement creative strategies to overcome social barriers, increase accessibility, improve communications, foster collective healing, and increase public participation in their own plans and actions for community recovery. To address the public health issue of racism, we need to increase public involvement. A key to increasing public involvement is to work with artists and implement creative strategies for community recovery. In closing, I'm honored to stand here today with those who have been fighting for communities and working to advance racial equity. Thank you all for the collaborative effort involved in developing this resolution. I want to acknowledge the emergency arts community and the almost 114,000 people that signed the petition to declare racism a public health emergency in Minneapolis. Your voice has been heard. You have contributed to this resolution and critical action. We need you in this long journey. Deep gratitude to Council Vice President Jenkins for your leadership, Debra Sadar for your strength and support, and to Ms. Joanna in New Orleans, who continues to teach me the real meaning of community recovery. And of course, all the collaborators who continue to advance racial equity while we navigate compounding emergencies. Thank you to our ancestors, our elders, and all those who have paved the way for us as we work towards an anti-racist future for our children. We know that art is a key to community recovery, and this key can help generations and generations of communities recover from the public health emergency of racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Commissioner Musicant.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be a part of this really important time when we hopefully make this declaration together in Minneapolis. I'm going to read a one-page document that provides us a little context within the world of public health as we think about racism. The Minneapolis Health Department joins with our national colleagues in local public health in supporting the incorporation and adoption of the principles of social justice into every aspect of public health practice in order to illuminate the root causes of health inequities. The World Health Organization's Commission on Social Determinants of Health's final report states that social justice is a matter of life and death. It affects the way people live, their consequent chances of illness, and their risk of premature death. That report recommends that governments tackle the equitable distribution of money, power, and resources. The impact of historical racism as seen in today's political and social institutions and systems impacts economic security, education, access to quality housing, access to nutritional food, and the resulting health outcomes. We must act as anti-racists in order to change our political and social institutions and systems so that all people can be served well by them and have equal opportunities to influence them. The impact of racism can be seen even before birth. Research has shown a significant relationship between the stresses of racism and low birth weight outcomes. Racism contributes to disproportional exposure to violence or threats of violence, both of which have long-term and latent consequences. And in 2020, we are witnessing with clarity the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in BIPOC communities, demonstrating once again the ongoing pattern of structural racism on health and the interconnection of our collective health and well-being as a community. By declaring racism as a public health emergency, we call for an approach that coordinates many sectors and disciplines, that promotes collective action, and is driven by both quantitative data and the voices and know-how of community members and leaders. It commits us to systemic change that comes from self-evaluation. A public health approach operates from the belief that we can prevent problems. In this case, we must undo years, decades, and centuries of injustices in order to prevent future harm. An emergency calls us to urgent action. We must not be racist and remove racism from our organizations and institutions, we must be anti-racist, working to reverse the foundational harms that persistently result in health inequities. There is a readiness for significant change. Using a public health approach in collaboration with communities, we can respond to that readiness and make measurable progress towards a more just society. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Commissioner Musicant. Ms. Marsh Stevens.
For final remarks, I do want to lift up leadership from the Division of Race and Equity. Melanie Plusinski, who was on staff as a program manager, really took charge of this with her background in public health and was bringing people together in order to pull this resolution to its final state. And so just want to definitely make sure that I'm naming for the public record her role in this work. Want to echo again deep gratitude for leadership from Council Vice President Jenkins and from Councilmember Cunningham, as well as the numerous people who came together to pull this resolution and to strengthen the language. I believe, as the director of the Division of Race and Equity, that a resolution like this really does lift up and reaffirm the city's commitment, not just towards racial equity, but the significance of the impact of racial disparities and structural racism on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So by approving and adopting this resolution today, it is one further step that the city of Minneapolis is taking and naming and reinforcing its commitment to supporting this work and recognizing that the importance of this work spans the entirety of our city enterprise and all of the work that we do. So thank you again for the opportunity to bring this forward.
Thank you, Director Marsh Stevens, and the chair recognizes Council Member Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Vice President and Madam Chair. I want to just very briefly speak to this as a co-author. Thank you to Commissioners Conley and Fernando for their work on the county level, to Council Vice President Jenkins for continued leadership in pushing our city to address racial disparities, and everyone who spent time making this resolution happen. I want to just briefly add that we have to specifically name racism if we are ever going to move from standing in awe of the consequences of racial disparities to actually conquering and eliminating them. While naming racial equity as a goal is important, we cannot do so unless anti-racism is woven into everything we do as a city. This resolution explicitly moves us in that direction. We are blessed not only to have elected leadership committed to eliminating racial disparities, but city staff like Joy and her team who are content experts in helping us make this happen. Racism in all its forms, as Amelia spoke to, hurts us all. We as a country have forgotten our devastating history of colonization and chattel slavery and Jim Crow laws and other racially discriminatory policies, as well as turn away now from the consequences of mass incarceration, criminalization, and over-policing in the present. We have not been taught how to see the connections between the disparities we see now and our history and present practices and policies. We have also not been taught how to openly talk about race, racism, and power. The work ahead of us is to overcome these barriers while systematically dismantling white supremacy in our policies and the ways we govern. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues for supporting this critical work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. And I do want to just say thank you to my staff, Ms. Diva Sadar and Ms. Zoe Beaujeret, as well as the Fourth Ward staff member Ade Salami and Dr. Rachel Hardiman from the University of Minnesota. Again, Councilmember Cunningham and the entire Division of Race and Equity, who spent many hours with multiple stakeholders. RECAC, the Race and Equity Advisory Committee, made recommendations to this, as well as Commissioner Musicant and the Department of Public Health. So many people have reached out to my office from around the country and around the world, supporting this resolution, as well as providing input in its development. And I ask and encourage my colleagues to support this resolution as well. So thank you all for that really wonderful presentation and for making time to be here with the council today. And are there any other questions or comments from council members? Seeing none, we did share the resolution and it is before us, and I will move approval and ask for a second.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Connell,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and the resolution will now be forwarded to the full City Council for final action at its regular meeting next Friday. And with that, I return the chair to Council President Bender.
Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins. With that, we've concluded all business to come before our committee. So without objection, we stand adjourned. See you tomorrow at the Budget Committee. Thanks, everyone.